All right, and welcome back to the PHLY Sixers Podcast. Joined once again by Kyle Neubeck. We have something that is a first in the
Sixers news, baby. There's actual things happening. Oh, my God.
Actual Sixers news to talk about. The Sixers signed Kelly Oubre Jr. to a 1-year minimum salary contract yesterday. Before we get into that, how you doing, Kyle?
I was going to say, I think Derek just expects that someone is going to do all these things for us. So everybody who's here, thank you for being here. If you're not subscribed to PHLY Sports on YouTube already, hit that subscribe button. Give us a nice little thumbs up. It obviously helps us out, helps the rest of the team out. And I'm doing well, Derek. I'm just glad that we have something other than speculative nonsense or backward looking. The Kelly Oubre is here or almost here, and now we have a new Sixers player to finally discuss.
Now, let's be clear. Most of what we'll talk about will still be nonsense. It'll just be something tangible to talk about, yeah. So Sixers signed Kelly Oubre Jr. He is a 27-year-old guard forward-ish wing player. Last year, averaged 20 points per game, and if you say nothing other than that, getting him from the minimum is an absolute steal. Unfortunately, there's more context that you have to add to that 20-point-per-game mark. We will try to add a little bit of context here for you over the next hour on this show. But 20.3 points, 5.2 rebounds, 1.1 assists. He shot 43% from the field and shot 31.9% from three-point range on over 7 attempts per game. The last 2 years with the Hornets, he shot or attempted over 7 threes per game. That's probably where a lot of people will start outside of his scoring numbers. Just starting it off, what do you kind of make of the signing here?
So I sort of feel how it appears a few of our commenters feel that he stinks, but he might have to play a lot and, things of that nature.
What is it you said on Slack?
I said he's a black hole, but at least he also is bad at shooting. Yeah. That's kind of my, that's my general impression of Kelly from afar. Now, that's obviously Kelly throughout his career has made a pretty decent amount of money for a role player. I believe his last deal was 2 years, $24 million. So, that's not chump change. That's not a guy that you're just signing off the street in September. And so I think the optimist case for Oubre with the Sixers is that this is a big-time prove-it deal for him, that he has fallen from relatively high draft pick, kind of I wouldn't say blue-chip talent, but at least like an interesting talent coming out of Kansas that has seen his star fall. And the sales pitch to him and his management would be he's going to have opportunities here because, as we discussed on previous podcasts, I think they really don't have many true wings. They have Danuel House Jr., and that's kind of it. It's a lot of forwards, guys who should play the four basically full-time. They have guys who are 2-3 hybrids, but really more on the 1-2 scale in terms of what their skill set is. So if nothing else, Kelly Oubre is absolutely a wing, great size, great athleticism. And look, I think if we were to just look at his numbers from last year specifically, I'd be really down on him because the numbers are atrocious when you're talking about the percentages and how ball dominant he was without playmaking for anybody. But last year was pretty unique in the sense that the Hornets certainly didn't come into the year thinking we want to run a lot of offense through Kelly Oubre. No. That's kind of a product of happenstance with LaMelo Ball being in and out of the lineup for long stretches of last year. And I think if now this is a giant if you can get him to buy into the role he should play and people want him to play, then it's a perfectly fine low risk signing, and it gives them something they haven't had previously on the roster. But getting him to buy in is basically the entire problem for his career. Yeah,
and we have a question here from Ryan in the chat asking whether he played with Embiid at Kansas. No, Oubre was a year after Embiid. He does have a little bit of a tie to another Sixers teammate. We might get into that a little bit later on.
Oh, we're going to get into it, yeah.
No, he is... If he were a draft prospect still, you'd go, oh, man, great athleticism, prototypical size.
Yeah.
He's got some functional athleticism. Maybe we believe in the shot coming around. But he is 27, almost 28 now. You kind of have to...
You saying people who are 27 can't change, Derek?
No, I'm saying you're probably not going to get that much better as a basketball player. And the fact that he's never really been an efficient basketball player at any point. His career assist-to-turnover ratio is in the negative. He's below the Mendoza line. He has more turnovers than assists in his career. Last year, he averaged 0.8 assists per turnover in the half court. Out of 550 or so players on its synergy, that ranked about 510th. And most of the players below him were like, pick and roll, rim diving, finishing only big men. Not a wing who, he takes a lot of catch and shoot shots, and we'll get into some of those numbers in a minute, but he also drives a lot. And for him to create so few shots for his teammates, he is the absolute definition of a black hole, the definition of an empty stat scorer. There are some things you can look at, specifically like defensively. I don't think he's a good defender, but he at least can bring some things. He can move his feet a little bit. He can pretty quick hands, get you out in transition. The jumper we'll talk about a little bit more, but at least he's a willing shooter. And I don't even say that like condescendingly. Like I think being a willing shooter is important.
Yeah.
And he can get out in transition, run the break. He's quick. He can cut a little bit off the ball, but he has to be willing to buy into a role where it's either a catch and shoot or a cut or the easiest attacking and closeout ever. And if it's not that, he has to pass out of it. Was he on a bad team last year with Charlotte? Absolutely.
Yes.
But he's been on decent teams, even good teams, and he's never really bought into that kind of role. He's never really changed his game. He's never been an efficient scorer. On the one hand, I think we obsess over the last roster spot a little too much. Now, I think there will be some people who will push back with me, like, oh, you spent so much time debating, DeAndre Jordan and all the backup centers and all. True. But that's because you relied on them. I didn't care that they were on the roster. I cared that you relied on him. You're not going to rely on Kelly Oubre as much. And if you do rely on him, it's mostly because you failed at every other spot on the roster. I don't really have a problem with him being on the roster. I worry that they have so little depth, he might end up playing more than he should.
Yeah, so I sort of look at this signing as they're almost putting too much pressure on Nick Nurse to, hey, just figure all this out, right? Yeah. They have a lot of guys on the roster now who, in hyper-specific, hyper-defined roles, okay, you could see, that makes a little bit of sense. Or, hey, they don't have another option like this on the roster. But if they don't fulfill that role, if they do go off script, if they do the sort of maddening things that they've done that haven't worked at previous spots, Nurse has to pull them, and there are only so many players Nick Nurse can pull before they don't have a rotation anymore, right? Like, that's the problem. If they had, let's call them innings eater type players, right? Like, I would say, we talked about George Niang yesterday. George Niang was an innings eater, regular season type player. You knew what you're getting from him every night. Even if George was missing shots, the theoretical floor spacing and the threat of him shooting was enough that there's value being provided there. And so you can take some risks elsewhere, right? Like, oh, we're going to throw in like a gadget defensive player. We're going to mix and match the wings. Tonight, Shake Milton might play, but another night, maybe we throw somebody else into that spot. Now that's like, look, they have Mo Bamba on a prove-it deal. Patrick Beverley, prove-it deal. Kelly Oubre, prove-it deal. Danny Green, prove-it deal. And they have all these guys that, yeah, perhaps they can exceed expectations and perhaps they can offer a little bit more, but somebody's really going to have to rise out of this, let's call it muck, I guess, and say, I'm going to do absolutely everything that Nick Nurse asks. And unfortunately, I think the guys who will do that offer the least upside. It's the Danny Greens, right? Danny Green will buy into a role, but I don't think he's got a lot left. Patrick Beverley, he'll buy in, but what does he actually have to offer this team that they can't get from, a younger player? And so I totally get the upside argument, and it's a low risk signing because he's a minimum. And I see somebody is hinting at a topic we're going to get to in our comments right now. But yeah, I think that's probably the issue. If Kelly Oubre was a minimum signing on a roster that was not hyper defined, but at least more solid elsewhere, I'd feel a lot better about it than a team where he might walk into it, James Harden might not be here, and he's going to end up getting a lot of shot opportunities and, more importantly, creation opportunities that he frankly doesn't really deserve.
Yep. We have a comment from Miles Johnson saying he basically believes that Oubre will be the first one Nick Nurse calls out publicly. If I set the over-under on 2.5 times Nick Nurse complains publicly to us about Oubre, taking the over-under on that.
I'll take the over because I think he's probably someone that Nurse feels as a veteran. He can be pretty hard on him. And frankly, I think Oubre is going to infuriate Nick Nurse. Now, I don't want to be completely on the negative corner here, right? I'm not a Kelly Oubre guy, broadly speaking. But I do think if you look at the types of players Nurse had success with in Toronto, he probably looks at him as, hey, maybe he's a ball of clay that defensively especially, I can try some things with him that other teams didn't. Like maybe you play him, he's been a almost pure small forward his whole career, right? Maybe you play him some minutes at the 4. You have your 1 through 3 guys play extreme pressure defense. And then you're seeing Joel Embiid and or Paul Reed next to Oubre at the rim. And that's a lot of athleticism and length and things there. But you're really, grasping at straws if that's where you're hoping he's going to provide value.
No, I mean, we spent a couple podcasts ago talking about, Paul Reed and that Nick Nurse might be willing to live with his nonsense offensively a little more because he values what he does defensively. I could see, and look, I don't think Oubre is a good defender. Again, like getting through screens, I think he's really bad at both off ball, running through screens, on ball, going through pick and rolls. His attentiveness, like he falls asleep a lot off ball, but he does do stuff that's valuable. And I think I might be higher on him defensively than I am offensively, which I think a lot of people looking at his 20 point per game scoring would be surprised at. I think most nights he's going to hurt you offensively. And we'll get into some of those reasons. A lot of it has to do with how much of a negative passer he is. But defensively, like in terms of getting steals, getting deflections, getting out on the break, I think Nick Nurse will value that for sure. Like I think he will help the Sixers in transition, both starting the break and finishing it. That is probably the one area I look at and I go, that's my most confident he'll contribute in.
I would tend to agree with that. So I'm going to get to the Harden portion of the proceedings in one moment after we talk about our good friends, DraftKings Sportsbook. Obviously, back with another week of football. Eagles are 2-0. Monday Night Football next week against Tampa Bay. I'm sure a lot of people are licking their chops at the thought of the Eagles' defensive front against Baker Mayfield. That's, seems like a pretty good betting opportunity if you're asking me. But, DraftKings Sportsbook, keeping us in on the NFL action. Great offers every single game day. New customers can bet $5, get $200 instantly in bonus bets. And DraftKings isn't stopping there. All customers can take advantage of 2 new offers every single game day this September. And football's more fun when you're in on the action. So download the app now. Sign up with code PHLY. New customers can bet just $5 to get $200 instantly in bonus bets, only on DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NFL, with code PHLY. The crown is yours. If you have a gambling problem, call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit www.1800gambler.net. In New York, call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY 467-369. In Connecticut, help's available for problem gambling. Call 888-789-7777. Visit ccpg.org. Please play responsibly. On behalf of Boot Hill Casino and Resort in Kansas, licensee partner Golden Nugget Lake Charles in Louisiana, 21 plus, age varies by jurisdiction, void in Ontario. See sportsbook.draftkings.com/football terms for eligibility, terms, and responsible gaming resources. Bonus bets expire 7 days after issuance. Eligibility and deposit restrictions apply. There, I kind of did it the faster way at the end there. I'm sort of getting there on these ad reads. So I wanted to circle back to.
I was going to say, we have Eugene in here saying the best case scenario is he gets included as a throw-in in a Harden deal. You seem like you might be skeptical of that happening. Tell us why.
Okay, so I want to touch on the Harden component specifically. On the one hand, on the court, I think in the pie in the sky scenario where Daryl Morey and James Harden break bread and make good and all that stuff, and he's able to get on board and support his teammates and say, I'm going to do what's best for Joel and everybody else. And James is back on the floor. I just think having another high volume guy and a more deliberate player is just going to take responsibility out of Oubre's hands, right? And just the simple fact of having Harden there.
To your point, last year he was awful as a catch and shoot player. Over the last 3 seasons, he's had 935 catch and shoot attempts, shot 33.7 of them. I think
33.7%
on them. Last year, of the 109 players who took at least 200 catch and shoot threes, he was the 5th worst percentage-wise. Now, part of that reason, last year, nearly 60% of his catch and shoot shots per synergy were guarded, and he shot 27% when they were guarded and 37% when they were unguarded. So the fact that a lot of them were tougher, contested catch and shoot shots certainly influenced those numbers. He would be helped by James Harden. Go.
Absolutely. So the point being, James deciding he wants to play for the team on the floor would be a boon for how much better Oubre could be and how much he could help the team, right? Just he's not going to be able to go off script and control the offense all that much because he just won't have the opportunities. Whereas if Tyrese Maxey is running the show, we both love Tyrese, great player, a lot of upside, yada, yada, yada. But as a floor general and a play-by-play point guard, Tyrese is somebody who has to learn, when do I defer? Who do I defer to? When do I call my own number? Those are things that take a lot of time and a lot of reps to figure out at this level. And I would be concerned about Kelly Oubre in that scenario without Harden, without a real true alpha dog ball handler. I know they have Joel Embiid, but as soon as that ball gets away from Joel in the post, if Oubre's getting a touch, that is a problem. But more importantly, and Derek was not aware of this until I flagged it for him prior to the podcast, there are some off-court allegations about the relationship between Oubre and Harden. I don't know how reputable the sources are, but as the story goes, years ago now, Harden was dating a young woman who may have started dating Kelly Oubre while the two were still seeing one another. And beyond that, Kelly Oubre is now married to this woman. And so there's a potential angle of, is there some unsettled business between the two away from the floor? And would they be able to coexist as teammates? I know a lot of what we've said is, hey, James doesn't have any beef with the current teammates. He likes a lot of the guys on this roster.
He's maybe different now.
And he's been in contact with all of them throughout the offseason. Weirdly enough, does bringing Kelly Oubre, unsettle the apple cart in that way? I don't know, but that's a subplot I was not prepared for late in the offseason.
One of the articles I was reading just a couple minutes ago mentioned that James Harden was so distraught he almost canceled a party. He almost didn't attend a party.
Can you imagine?
James Harden, he likes his nightlife. For him to almost cancel that, he must have been really, really upset.
Yeah. So again, these are the sourcing on these things is pretty tenuous. But all I would say is, in the NBA gossip circles, the idea is out there that Harden and Oubre are not exactly best friends. So I would imagine this is something that the Sixers are aware of. And look, I think the Sixers look at it as, if I'm taking you inside their thought process, it's what we said with Nurse. It's that if Kelly buys in and he does the thing that Nick Nurse wants him to do, he's going to play and he's going to get opportunities. But if he doesn't, Nick's going to say, you're sitting your ass on the bench with some of these other guys. We'll see.
Yep. Going back to the shooting, I guess, a little bit. We touched on it a little bit with the catch and shoot numbers. I expect that to go up here just because I expect him to have easier shots. Overall, catch and shoot jumpers over the last 3 seasons, he averaged 6.5 catch and shoot threes compared to 1.5 basically off the dribble threes. So really you need him to be a better catch and shoot player. When I say I expect to get better because more of them are going to be unguarded, I'm not saying he's going to come in here and shoot 40% from 3 on volume. I don't think that is realistic. He's just never been that kind of player. But could that be a 34, 35% instead of a 31, 32% from 3? I think there's a possibility. And if that happens, I still think this is going to be weird to say, and I'm going to get that out in front. I think we overrate 3-point percentage when we talk about shooting a little bit, because I do think that, first of all, if you're making 35% from 3 on high volume, that tends to be a pretty efficient look, especially if you start talking about, maybe late clock, like last 10 seconds of clock. the expected value changes so rapidly. If he can quickly get a shot off reliably at a 35% clip, that's valuable, especially on volume. And just taking 7-8 threes per game like he has been the last few years, that will bend the defense if they start going in a little bit. So I do like the fact that he is a high volume, a willing catch and shoot player. If playing next to Harden and Embiid can bump that up from 32% 34, 35, he can launch away as far as I'm concerned, assuming that they're not atrocious. It comes down to the decision-making. That's my real gripe. And the defense being a lot more consistent.
Yeah, and I think, a lot of the people in the comments are saying that he's not being brought here to be the number one option. Randy saying they desperately needed any type of bench scoring. And those things are absolutely true. I think in the right role, you can see the vision for this guy. And that's sort of been the thing for Kelly Oubre throughout his career. Now, the problem has been, he got dropped into the Golden State Warriors when they're still at their contending best, maybe, or when people thought they'd be at their contending best. And Oubre was a really rough fit there. That's a team that is predicated on motion and movement and sharing the basketball, and it's just a constant ping-ponging around with passing. And Oubre didn't fit there at all, and I think he ended up being this really frustrating figure for most of the Golden State fan base, who obviously they can pick out guys this deep into the dynasty in Golden State who fits there and who's a Warriors type player, and he didn't end up being that type of guy. So that's one of the only real times we've seen Kelly on a team that had expectations, that wanted him to be in sort of a side role, a bit player type role, and say, we don't need you to create, we don't need you to do much of anything except to buy into the system. And he struggled to do it. Now, that's not to say a few seasons later, that was 3 years ago, right? A lot of time has passed. He now, I hate to harp on the contract because I'm not counting people's money over here. But once guys get to the point that they're on these veteran minimum type deals, that is like a come to Jesus moment for a lot of these guys. They say, well, I think I'm worth a lot more than that. I've made a lot more money than that in the past. Why am I here? And for some players, that's a real wake-up call. And maybe that's all Kelly needs. He looks at that. He comes into camp with a different attitude. He says, I have to prove it to even be in this rotation. And if I don't stick in this rotation, my future opportunities dwindle and dwindle and dwindle. There's always the chance. I never write somebody off entirely, but all we can base our current opinions of him on are what we've seen to date. And there's a lot of troubling stuff in there.
I feel like the story of the offseason is maybe this will be a wake-up call. Talking about it with Harden, maybe the fact that he didn't get the contract he wanted would be a wake-up call. It seems right now he still blames the Sixers more than has woken up.
Alex says that I'm pocket watching. I promise that I'm not. I want all these guys to make as much money as they can make while they can make it. But that's the reality, man. Like, if it's somebody that's listening to the show, or Derek and I all of a sudden started getting paid less, so you got a pay reduction, you'd be like, oh, what the hell just happened? What do I need to do differently in order to avoid that? And that's always a thing that in any line of business or walk of life is you should be caring about how your performance is impacting your pay.
I agree.
So hopefully ours is doing all right so far. I don't want to have that conversation anytime soon.
So besides those two, come to Jesus moments that you mentioned, there's also been a lot of other buy low candidates that Morey has gone in on, whether that is Pat Beverly, Obamba, a lot of players coming in on minimum deals. We saw this a lot with him in Houston when he was trying to build around Harden. The first time, I guess, why do you think that is, and what do you think's behind? That's the same question. Why do you think that is, and which of these do you think are going to work out?
I mean, I think the reasoning behind it comes down to Harden has, in some respects, painted them into a corner, right? They don't really have a lot of, I'm using this word again, optionality in terms of what they can do. They were not, as far as I can tell, prepared for an opt-in scenario. They were planning around, hey, maybe he decides he's going to go to Houston and sign a deal there. That comes off the table. Then I think they're preparing for opt-out, and what does this scenario look like? How much are we willing to give him over 2 years? If it goes an extra year, how much further are we going to come down on that annual value on his contract? But the opt-in, I think, was a pretty shocking thing for not just the Sixers, but basically the entire league. I don't think anyone had priced that into their offseason. I don't know if anybody else around the league would have altered their plan because of that. But now, because he opted in, the Sixers are looking at it as, hey, if he's expiring next summer, we already have the Tobias expiring. There's no real reason to go, 2-3 years on anybody, even if it's a steal of a deal, when we could head into next summer and say to basically any free agent on the market, come here and play with Joel. I think that's a big reason behind the pivot. I don't have a ton of confidence that it's going to return big upside, and we end up back at the same place where they need Joel to be the guy who carries everybody, and they need Tyrese to make a huge leap.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think they were certainly placed in limbo when Harden made that decision they made, because they know he's not going to be around long term. And if he's not going to be around long term, or well, they don't know, but certainly he's not locked in long term. And with the way he's talking, I don't expect him to be around long term. And by long term, I mean a couple months. And if that's not going to be the case, and you know you don't have the leverage to get a good trade, the free agency next summer is the only real option you have left. And I think keeping that cap space has obviously been a very big priority for them all summer long. When you do that, you tend to sign minimum guys. And by signing minimum guys and not using that taxpayer mid-level, you're not restricting yourself to the hard cap. So makes sense.
I do want to say, so Sam just said Morey's punting this season. I disagree with that, or at least I think if you were to put Morey in front of or subject him to a lie detector test, we'll say. Right. I don't think he believes, as long as Joel is on this team, that they're punting on any season. Now, are they going to load up and sign long-term deals every single season? No, like the construction of the roster is going to look different, as are the offers that they make to different people. But I don't think, now, look, I understand he views it differently than the fan base, right? If he's not going and getting the absolute best guys that are available on the market, that's going to be viewed as a failure in some respects, right? But I don't think the Sixers look at it as punting. I think they're trying to straddle a fence in some ways, which I think that ends up being a pretty risky strategy, and we can certainly debate who is even a free agent next summer that is worth trying to hedge here. But I think their view is, as long as Joel is on the team, they'll be able to tinker and mess with the roster and make subsequent moves to try to be a contender. And it all hinges on, what does that guy do when the games really matter? And frankly, is he healthy?
I'm sorry, I have no idea what you said, because you said load up, and all I could think about was Brett.
Load up, brother.
Yeah, what was that, Ferk? That was Ferk, right?
That was Ferk.
Or was that Landry?
Actually, it was one of the two. I wish I actually remembered, but yeah. When I was at the wedding this past weekend, we said load up, brother, quite a few times, specifically when one of my close friends kept going back for extra portions of the firecracker shrimp at the rehearsal dinner. So load up, brother has taken on a new life within my social circle, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, look, in terms of punting the season, like, I think you're right. As long as Joe's here, they don't feel like they're punting the season. I also probably think Daryl just doesn't think these end of bench matters all that much. And until you get your stars lined up and you actually know what you're building around, it's tough to invest any real resources in the supporting pieces around. And really, outside of the taxpayer mid-level, it's not like they have all this cap space or exceptions to use that they're not using. It's really that Harden trade is going to determine the rest of the bench pieces around them.
Yeah, and it's the boring thing to say, right? I hate sitting up here and being like, well, it all depends on Harden. It all depends on Harden. It all depends on Harden. But until that piece is solved, and I think at this point, they've made it clear that they're saying, we want Harden back. We don't like the offers. Unless Harden gets on board with that, this is where we are. It's going to be this stuck in stasis. We don't know what's going on, and that's the deal. So I understand the frustration with it, but that's kind of the situation the Sixers have handed us. So we'll revisit that thought in a second. I want to tell you guys about one of our other friends and sponsors, the good people at Game Time. So I know you guys listening on the other end of this stream have had problems in the past securing tickets when you want them, for the price you want them. And the Game Time app is the fastest growing app in the ticket marketplace for good reason. You can get concert tickets, even for playoff games and sporting events. Go to the theater. You can expand your cultural horizons beyond thinking about Joel Embiid and burner accounts and all sort of deals. And the Game Time app has all sorts of fun stuff. They have flash deals, last-minute tickets, images of your seat, lowest price guarantee. There's event cancellation protection. Like, how can you not love all this stuff that Game Time is providing for you? You don't have to plan months in advance. Right up to the event starting, these deals are available to you, and you can snag the tickets without the stress with Game Time. All you have to do, download the Game Time app, create an account, use code PHLY for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code PHLY for $20 off your purchase. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Is there any event you're hoping to get tickets to sometime soon, Derek, that you're not a ticket guy anymore? You're above that because you're such a snooty professional member of the media now. You just don't go to anything?
No, I go to Phillies games sometimes.
Okay.
Yeah. Not as often as you. So I used to have a 17 game plan back in 2008. I think I gave that up sometime around like 2014, 2015. But I still try to get down there maybe 5 or 10 times a year.
Yeah, so baseball has kind of, this summer at least, fallen off the vision line for me because I've been so busy with my house and, installing cabinets and all kinds of stupid adult stuff that I hate doing. We had Jamie Lynch in here, I saw earlier, doing some renovation in the office, installing some new artwork on the wall, or at least assisting with that. So that's been most of my summer. I wish I'd been able to get down to the ballpark more, but I'm sure once the playoffs start, I'll be like every other bandwagon Philly sports person and watch every Phillies game and be all in.
Might have to have a couple watch parties here in the studio.
Well, we will have some beers watching those games because I won't have to talk about them, unlike the Sixers, so I can let loose a little bit.
Hey, and we've got a couple TVs in here while we're watching and preparing for a show. There might be a Phillies game on in the second screen. Absolutely.
This is true. Yeah, I just by accident, I'm going to watch more baseball here than I watch basically all year.
Yeah. All right, so where do you want to pivot to from that? You want just general conversation about the regular season? Any more thoughts on Kelly? Any other lineup?
Well, so
stuff?
There's a lot of chatter in the comments about Harden. I guess, do you think... So we have a comment, Harden cannot be on this roster for game one. Do you believe that? Like, do you think he will make it so toxic that it is impossible for Daryl to keep him on the team, essentially?
I think he shouldn't. I don't think that's best for him, but I don't necessarily know that he believes that. I think he will be on the roster game one. Will he be around the team? Will he have an injury he came down with? I don't know. But I do not think this will be resolved by week one, and I would be surprised if he will make it so uncomfortable that Daryl takes a shitty deal.
Yeah, I don't think it's an ideal situation by any stretch of the imagination, but if the offers that are out there are, hey, we want James Harden, but we're not willing to give you Terrence Mann, and you might get Marcus Morris, Robert Covington, and some crappy first-round picks from a team that's trying to win a title. What the fuck is the point of that? Like, why would you even bother? I understand when the Ben Simmons situation was dragging on a couple of years ago, I could understand the people that were like, move him for, make up a name, CJ McCollum, somebody who's a very good, if flawed, basketball player, just because they thought, Joel needs a real team around him. Yep. It's not worth throwing away this season. It's not worth doing this. If the offers on the table are, we'll give you crappy role players or like okay role players and picks that don't matter at all for James Harden, and then the Sixers have to try to go to war with that group because, look, quite frankly, they don't have the ammunition to trade for a guy who can approximate even like 50% of what Harden brings to the table. They don't have lots of future picks to move. To make any kind of sizable deal, they'd have to move Maxey. Not a single soul in this city wants them to move Tyrese Maxey. You could say they're trading Maxey for, Giannis, and people would lose their goddamn minds. Like that, people love him. So there's no real option out there unless a Harden suitor comes through with a bona fide certified offer, and that hasn't happened. So until that happens, and that might take until January, February, as teams suffer injuries, as they disappoint based on their offseason moves. That's always what you have to watch, right? The thing for the Sixers is Joel has to essentially keep them afloat, and he proved that he was able to do so without Ben a few years ago. He keeps them afloat, and other contenders or playoff teams disappoint and are looking around like, well, what the hell do we do to get better? All of a sudden, James Harden, a guy who can still score 20-plus points a game, lead the league in assists, can run a bench offense without the other star, he becomes a lot more appealing as the pressure mounts later in the season. But I don't think that's happening before training camp starts, and I don't think it's happening before the season starts.
I agree. I feel like there's if they had a Venn diagram of the people who say, oh, get him out of here now, he's got to be off the team by opening day, and also well, they're not good enough to contend, so why should I pay attention? I feel like that's almost a perfect circle when those things are almost contradictory. If they're not good enough now, then why are you so worried about preserving the start of the regular season? Like, wait until you can get the best package for him, so maybe you have a chance to correct the fact that they're not good enough now to contend for a title.
Well, here's the other thing, too. Let's just say James Harden were to show up day one of training camp, preseason, whatever it is, or even the regular season, and he's out there, I don't want to go so far as saying actively sabotaging the team, but let's just say he's not giving it his best effort. We have seen in the playoffs in recent seasons, seeding is not that important. The important thing is that you have the best possible team and that you're trending upward as you move toward the playoffs. It doesn't mean you need to be ready to go on Halloween or November 1st or wherever you want to say. So if Harden decides he's throwing away the first few weeks, but the Sixers end up getting a better trade package for him in January because they were able to be patient, that's way better than being like, well, we don't want to live with 2 weeks of discomfort or whatever it would be.
And by the way, getting a better trade package probably doesn't mean they have a contender this year. It probably means they have more trade chips to add into a future deal down the line. It might mean an extra draft pick or two. It might mean a better draft pick from a team that is going to have a higher expected value on that pick. Something of that sort. It's probably not going to be a guy who's ready to contribute right now and make you a contender. It's just you don't have the leverage to get that kind of deal. James Harden isn't thought of that widely around the league. You're probably just getting better quote-unquote assets by holding off, and maybe that means a second deal around the trade deadline. Maybe that means being a little more flexible in the summer. Who knows? But I think it's probably going to be tough to...
So there's a line of thought in the comments right now I want to get to, but Mike asks, will Ferk join the Harden protest to finally get his trade? It's a good question. I mean, are we going
He's
to
too
see...
nice. Ferk can't cause a
Are
scene.
we going to see Ferk at like Club Risque, popping bottles on a Tuesday night before they have a game the next day, or hanging out at Cheerleaders or Delilah's or one of these other wonderful establishments around the city? I don't know. Or maybe he'll be on the Vegas playing with old Jimbo, but it would be out of character for Ferk. I do feel for him to some degree because he's the first guy ever to request trades in multiple seasons and have it basically like, yeah, go away, like wave away at it.
He requests a trade, and then he just kind of like drops it. It's like he almost forgets.
And that's
he did
to his credit. Like, he doesn't cause a fuss. He's not a problem in the locker room. By all accounts, he's a very good guy. But I do feel bad for him to a degree. So there are some people chatting, asking, is something we talked about earlier this week, Derek, but the idea, who do you think is better? This team without Harden or the Ben-less 21-22 team, I guess, up to the deadline? I think I weighed in quite a bit on it, but I guess where do you stand on that?
I would probably say this team just because Joe and Maxey, I think, are better and more ready to carry that heavy load. But certainly you look at the depth of that previous team, you would take that depth. You would take the supporting pieces, you'd take the bench pieces. I do, and I think this is one area where without Harden, we talked about this yesterday too, the loss of Shake Milton is probably a bigger deal than you expect because Shake can just carry you at times with that ball handling responsibility. We don't want Pat Bev running the show for, 40 minutes on games where Tyrese Maxey's out. So I think that team was probably better equipped to handle the inevitable nights off when Joe or Maxey were out. But when those two are in a lineup, I would probably take this team. But it's close. It's close. Either way, it doesn't matter because neither of those teams, none of the teams have gotten out of the second round, but neither of those teams are certainly getting out.
I think at the time, too, there was still a bit of a belief that, all right, even if Ben is not here, there are guys on the roster that are on the ascent, right? Tyrese is certainly still on that track, but you had like a Matisse, right? Where it's, okay, Matisse is going to have to step into a bigger role. He's going to be the number one defender of top perimeter guys on the other team. And obviously Matisse moved on and Jalen McDaniels was here briefly and is out of here. And I think the thing that would stress me out as a fan would be, or not stress me out, but disappoint me as a fan, is that there aren't as many of those upside cases, right? Now, maybe they're better prepared to win right now. You do have a lot of veterans with a lot of NBA experience that are going to walk in day one, understand what someone like Nick Nurse wants, and maybe be better equipped to win games. But I don't know. That's also a giant injury risk, right? A lot of guys in their mid to late 30s who shouldn't be playing heavy volume minutes. Shake versus Pat Beverly. Yeah, that is kind of a sad state of affairs that's where we're at. I guess, yeah. Paul Reed is one of the players who I'd say is still ascending, and a lot of...
Who's backup center on that? Which year was that? Was that DeAndre?
I suppose. Are you saying Andre, not DeAndre Jordan? DeAndre. There are just so many backup centers that we've cycled through over the years. But yeah, I think Paul Reed is he's the most interesting of all these guys, even if he's not quite the best one. And how Nurse uses him is a gigantic storyline.
That was the Andre Drummond year. You're right.
It was the Andre Drummond year. Yeah.
Who do you think, speaking of backup centers, if everything stays the same, the Sixers would have to release one player before the start of the season, one player under an NBA contract before the start of the season. Who do you think that would be? And like we haven't asked around. We don't know, but just
based on nothing other than looking at the roster, I guess Petrusev.
It could just be Trez.
It could be Trez. His deal is guaranteed, so that's kind of the problem with that. It's, do you want to just forfeit the guaranteed money there? It doesn't seem like they're adding salary regardless, so maybe they just view it as, well, who cares? It makes no functional difference, but that would be a mild surprise for me. I would imagine based on some of the on the margins decisions they've made, I'd say it's probably more likely that somebody whose contract is not guaranteed would be on the chopping block.
Could be. All right, real quick before we finish stuff, and if you have any questions, drop in the chat. We'll try to get to them in this last segment. Before that, a quick word from FOCO. FOCO is a leading manufacturer of sports and entertainment merchandise with a product line that includes apparel, accessories, toys, collectibles, novelty items, and more. It's the best officially licensed gear for all sports and fandoms. And we are now squarely in football and tailgating season, which means it's time for overalls, hoodies, hats, sunglasses, bags, everything you need for a game. And FOCO has hooked PHLY up and provided awesome pieces for our sets. FOCO always has our back for Philly sports, and they have yours too. Get the best gear around by using the link in our description. For all non-presale items, use a promo code PHLY for 10% off.
I didn't want to do my Vanna White with all our
merch
behind us again, because yesterday Derek started laughing and could barely get through the ad read. So I wanted to make sure that my... I don't want to call you trusted sidekick. That makes you sound like Robin to my Batman. I don't know quite what the duo...
I believe they have a word. It's called co-host.
Yeah, but I was trying to think of like an equivalent. Okay. Like Starsky and Hutch. Is one of those better than the other?
I have no idea.
I don't know how that works. That's for another podcast, I suppose.
Could be I was trying to make a Freddie Mercury joke, but it's gone.
You lost it.
Trying to get on Zach, and I joined him. Yeah, I don't know if I have too much. I think Trez, since he can't play right now, is a chance. But I think your point about guaranteed money is certainly one that they, you might be able to send someone $1 million or $2 to take Trez's contract.
Yeah. So on the Harden, we every show is just James Harden until the wheels fall off, I guess. But I think we've had a couple of people refer to this in the comments, but Joel is the guy who's going to decide essentially how uncomfortable things can get, because the second he is fed up with whatever's going on with Harden and he puts his foot down and says, screw this, I'm not dealing with it anymore. You need to trade this guy for whatever you can get for him. That's when shit gets real, right? Because if Joel's the good soldier like he was during the Ben situation and says, I got us and I got this team and Tyrese and Tobias and we have enough people here to hold down the fort, even if James is, causing a scene or not playing or wearing a suit from the Nutty Professor, whatever he's doing. As long as Joel says this is okay, nothing else really matters. The very second he comes out at a press conference after a game and says, this is bullshit, I need a real team around me, every single person's neck in that organization snaps to attention at once, and then we will see things fall into place. But maybe that doesn't happen. Maybe Joel will default to what he said over the years where he says, I'm not the general manager, I don't make these decisions, and he'll put it on other people, and then he'll be promoting a movie in August and say, maybe I'll go elsewhere. There's no way to ever predict what he's going to do. It's what I really enjoy about covering Joe on multiple levels. Like sometimes he just steps up to a microphone and decides to burn somebody to ashes, and the Sixers might be the next target. You just don't know.
He did a couple years ago with Ben. He did maintain mostly, this is not my job. He kept his cool. He didn't really put any pressure, at least publicly, on the organization to make that happen quickly. And that dragged on.
And I don't think it's stretching the truth to say he likes James and playing with James more than Ben. Like there's more
there's more on-court synergy there.
There's more synergy. I think they have more of a personal connection. I'd always thought the friendship or non-friendship was overblown as it related to Ben and Joe, but I do think there's more of a strong interpersonal dynamic between James and Joe.
To Randy's point, the second show, if he ever did do that, Sixers would lose all their leverage. That's true. Not that they have a ton of leverage now, but they would have even less then. But also to Alex's point in the chat, I just don't think Joe's necessarily that type of person, at least in public, at least as it regards to, I don't think he wants to be seen as a villain. And I think if he did that, a lot of people would see him as maybe not the villain, but certainly, part of the problem.
Now, here's the thing, though. I think this offseason's the first time I've seen Joe maybe lose sight of what is going to resonate with people and the fan base.
You mean when he talked about winning the title?
Yeah, I'm not even just that, though, but like obviously, really, he's been historically very funny on social media, and he likes to troll people and what have you. And I don't think it has sunk in for him quite yet just how angry a lot of people are. Yeah. And he's gone from, oh man, this guy's just like us, and the fans feel connected to him, to now he's in a place where you see him say something and these people are like, get the hell out of here. Like, what are you doing? You're acting like a clown. And so I would say that, yes, I agree that Joe handles this sort of business one way historically. He's always been, let management figure it out. He certainly talks to people behind the scenes and all that. I'm not so sure that's going to be the case this year. I think there's been enough things building and sort of a change in his synergy or his connection with the city and the fan base that maybe he decides, look, now's my time. Now's when I have leverage. And another example, another market, I think Giannis has changed his tune in Milwaukee. They've been more successful than the Sixers, but he's looking around and he says, we just lost to Miami in round one. The team's getting older. And so Giannis is on podcasts saying, I don't know if I'm going to be here. I need the entire organization to be bought into winning. That seems like a shot at management, at his teammates. And I think that has created a whole firestorm for the Bucks. And I'm sure Joel looks at that and says, well, look what I can do. Look what kind of power Giannis has or I have. And maybe he wakes up one day and says, I'm going to use that and leverage that.
Certainly could happen. And the Giannis, we talked about it last week while you were gone with Rich. It really is just a reminder of that could change at any moment, because they pushed all their chips in trying to get Jrue Holiday. It paid off for them in the biggest way possible. They won that title. You thought that would buy them more years. Now, when you have a tough out like they did in the first round of the playoffs, like that can change things. But you thought there was a little more of a grace period. Giannis isn't wrong. That team, when you start looking at their future, it's going to be real tough to both maintain that core and also rebuild. I understand why he would maybe not want to hitch the last few years of his not the last few years. He's still got a bunch more, but a good portion of the remainder of his physical prime. But there's also that same argument for Joel. And Joel's not blameless here. Like, he's never come through in the way that Giannis did. But you understand that there is a timeline not only on the team building, but the stars look at it too and say, look, I've only got this career for, maybe 15 years. And the first 5 to 7 of them, I'm really learning on the job. Your prime is short. You only have so many years. There's a finite number of chances you get. It goes back to punting this season. You have to try as hard as you can. It's just the avenues they have to surround them with talent. There aren't many.
And think about it just from Joel specifically's point of view. He's seen entire seasons go up in smoke because of his own health challenges, right? He's been in the playoffs all these years and had a different health ailment derail every major playoff run that they've been on. And so even if he thinks he has, 5 to 8 good years, and 8 would really be impressive for a guy his size to get to your late 30s and still be an impact guy. I think he looks around and he looks at his own history and says, there are only so many chances I'm going to have. And so I am on Joel watch all season, and I am very curious to see if his approach to letting management be management withstands the James Harden circus this year.
And again, I have no indication that he is anything but supportive right now. I think he probably in his head does want to spend his entire career in Philadelphia. It's just you never really know when a tipping point could be. And so because of that, you're always worried about it. Yeah.
And to your point about Joel was out in L.A. at the Rico Hines runs where we saw Paul Reed and Turk and Jaden Springer and Mo Bamba. So a bunch of the role players, young guys are out there playing. And so Joel being there and being amongst his teammates in August, September, whenever this footage actually comes from is unclear. But for him to make that statement just with his presence is really important. And that's a sign of somebody who right now is committed to being here and committed to being as good of a leader as he can be for this team. So it's just all we're trying to get at here, I think, is in the NBA, things change so quickly and you can't be surprised if/when Joel just decides to throw a match on the gasoline.
Yeah, I think that's probably fair. Any other questions throughout the chat you saw that were worthwhile or thoughts on?
No, so there's a lot. I've been trying to pay attention to. There have been a lot of 3-ball Paul, obviously. We're all very excited about 3-ball Paul.
We'll see.
But yeah, I think that's probably a good stopping point for today.
And this was really a pod mostly probably about the backups and the bench and how McDaniels can... you almost wish he was a better of the 2 Charlotte forwards that they could have gotten at the trade deadline. Unfortunately, they're stuck with Kelly Oubre. But it's not one that I'm going to say it's a bad move because 15th roster spot, minimum contract, it almost can't be a bad move. And he's certainly talented for that role. You need him to buy in on his role in a way he never really has. You need him to channel what he can do at a decent level and ignore what he can't. My only concern is they're so lacking of depth that they give Oubre a little more responsibility, or at least they don't have a structure around him to prevent him from his worst instincts. And because you're relying on him, then all of a sudden you start focusing on his very real deficiencies, his very real limitations. If Nick Nurse can just get him to buy in defensively, because I do think at points, it's not like he's a completely non-committed defender. If he can get him consistently committed and limit him to just catch and shoots and transition, I think there's a useful player. We've just never seen him stay that way and stay in that mold for an entire season, no matter which kind of team, good or bad, he's been on.
Yep. So I think on that note, it's wait and see mode for this team, Kelly Oubre, maybe for Derek and I as well. Thank you, everybody, for coming through today. I see Randy. I see Alex. I see Eugene's left a lot of comments today. I see a bunch of different people. Thank you guys so much for being with us today. We will be back with you tomorrow. I believe we will have a third person with us, if I remember correctly. It's going to be the full three-man group with Rich. Oh. And, we won't get into the other three-man group, but Rich will be with us tomorrow. And if you guys haven't already, give us a subscribe on YouTube, hit that thumbs up button, and
smash that like button. That's the first time in my career I've ever told you to smash that like button.
We will be back with you before you know it. See you guys.
We all silly like the mayor.